Welcome back to Dippy Does It All, the podcast where curiosity meets chaos. Today, I'm talking about something that hits both history and whiskey in one neat pour. In this episode, we're talking about one of the most fascinating bourbon stories that I've ever come across. And that's Kentucky Peerless Distilling Company. Their story is loaded with legendary family history, rock stars, military generals, and some darn good bourbon. So pour yourself a glass, neat if you're brave, and let's get into it. First, let's quickly touch on bourbon in case some of you don't know why it has become an interest of mine. Bourbon is widely regarded as the only original American spirit, and this is due to its deep historical ties to the United States. Its distinctive production methods and its designation by law are why bourbon is so special. While other spirits, like whiskey, rum, and gin, existed before the U.S. came into being, bourbon was developed in the U.S., making it an American invention. It was originally distilled by early American settlers, particularly in the state of Kentucky, where the corn was in abundance. They were struggling with so much corn that it was rotting, and they didn't know what to do with it until some genius decided to distill it. Over time, the distillers began refining those techniques and creating what we now recognize as bourbon. In 1964, the U.S. Congress declared bourbon America's native spirit and set legal guidelines for what qualifies as bourbon. It must be made in the United States, though the specific state doesn't matter. It must be made from at least 51% corn. It must be aged in new, charred American oak barrels. It can't be distilled above 160 proof and must be entered into the barrel at no higher than 125 proof. And you cannot add any flavorings or colors. Bourbon production involves a distinctive process that evolved in the U.S., like the use of charred new oak barrels, which imparts rich flavors of vanilla, caramel, and oak to the spirit. The bourbon-making tradition, particularly in Kentucky, blends European distillation techniques with American innovation. It's distinctively American in the choice of ingredients, aging methods, and production practices. Corn, which is native to the Americas, became the key ingredient for making bourbon. It sets bourbon apart from the other whiskey types like Scotch or Irish, which primarily use barley or rye. The high corn content contributes to bourbon's sweet and rich flavor profile. Bourbon has helped shape the economy of the U.S., particularly in the state of Kentucky, which is still regarded as the heart of bourbon production. The industry has a rich history and plays a key role in the state's culture, tourism, and economy. Bourbon's global recognition has also established it as a symbol of American craftsmanship and pride. Bourbon is the only spirit that has been legally defined and uniquely tied to the American heritage, which makes it a true American original. It represents American ingenuity, craftsmanship, and a blending of cultures that led to a spirit unlike any other. Now let's get into it. The story of Kentucky Peerless, my favorite distillery. Let me introduce you to Roy M. Taylor III, but to everyone, he goes by Corky. A man with bourbon in his blood, stories in his soul, and a mission that brings his family's distilling legacy back to life. But to really understand Peerless, we must go back, way back. Let's start with Corky's father, Roy Aces Taylor. The name Aces wasn't just some cool nickname he made up. Nope. He got that name from none other than General George S. Patton himself. Yeah, that Patton. Aces was Patton's chief aide during World War II, and in a seriously wild piece of history, General Patton's own handgun was passed down to Corky by his dad, and it now has a home at the distillery in Louisville, Kentucky. And that's not all. General Barry McCaffrey, you might have heard the name, had his retirement party right there at Kentucky Peerless. That's the kind of legacy we're talking about. Corky grew up living the dream on Waikiki Beach in Hawaii. His dad was stationed there before they moved back to Kentucky. Does that sound like paradise? But it didn't stay mellow for long for Corky. He ended up in a military school at Castle Heights. And here's where it gets a little juicy. His roommates were the freaking Allman Brothers. Yes, those Allman Brothers. They used to play guitar on Sundays, just chillin' and jammin', until a certain Al Gore snitched on them for going to Dairy Queen to check out the girls. And boom, they got kicked out. That's politics and rock and roll, baby. Now, let's rewind even further to Corky's great-grandfather, Henry Craver. He was born in Poland and immigrated to Manhattan as a child. He was selling newspapers by the age of 5. Then, at 19, he boarded a riverboat with no plan but to ride until the money ran out. That journey ended in Henderson, Kentucky. Out of money, he walked up a hill and found a bar called Buckets. He asked the owner if he could sweep the floors and sleep in the attic. 2 years later, he owned the place. But Henry had big dreams. He had always wanted to be a banker. So he set off to St. Louis. He learned the ropes and came back and started the First National Bank of Henderson. Oh, then he decided to casually buy a distillery in 1889. He took a production of 8 barrels a day and ramped it up to 200 barrels a week. The man was a machine. Noted as one of the top 10 bourbon producers of that era. But he didn't stop there. He built a brewery, sat on the board of 5 banks in Chicago, and owned the Palmer House. Famously, the first hotel with an electric light bulb, an elevator, a telephone, the luxury of air conditioning, and my favorite piece of history, the birthplace of the brownie. Yes, that delicious, chocolatey, gooey delicacy that is even better if you add a ribbon of caramel and a little sprinkle of the sea salt. Are you hungry yet? Because I am. But then came Prohibition. Henry had 63,000 barrels of bourbon to deal with. Most distilleries folded, but Henry, he had the space, and he waited 3 years for a license, and he was able to sell a majority of his bourbon to, you guessed it, his friends, the Walgreens brothers. And if you've ever seen a Vendome copper still, you can thank Henry for that too, because the Vendome family has credited him with their grandfather, Mr. Sherman, being able to start his company. So when Mr. Corky needed to find a still for his present-day Peerless Distillery, Vendome bumped him straight to the front of the line out of respect for his great-grandfather's legacy. Now that's family influence that money cannot buy. Corky didn't start in the bourbon world, however. He worked in financial services. When he sold his business, he retired to Florida. But the lack of work crushed him. That's when he got together with his son Carson, who was in the construction business. They sparked an idea together. Why don't we bring back the family distillery? They ended up finding an old tobacco warehouse on the river in Louisville, Kentucky, and they turned it into a bourbon palace, or sanctuary, you can even say. And let me tell you, they do it right. They didn't source any whiskey when they started. They made everything in-house. They use a sweet mash process instead of a sour mash. And you might be wondering, what is a sweet mash process? How sweet mash works is each batch of whiskey is made with all new grains, water, and yeast. They don't use something called backset. Backset is spent mash from a prior distillation. Because they don't use the backset, there's no acidic residue from older mash. The pH levels in sweet mash fermentations tend to be higher, allowing for a broader range of yeast activity and more delicate flavors. Distillers have greater precision over each fermentation as every batch is consistent and unaffected by the chemistry of reused components. Sweet mash offers cleaner, brighter, and more vibrant whiskey. You may taste more fruits or more fresh grain notes. It requires, however, extreme sanitation and care, since there's no acidic backset to help kill off unwanted bacteria. This makes the sweet mash process more challenging and respected in craft distilling. Kentucky Peerless uses this method exclusively, which helps them create the layered, expressive bourbons and ryes they're known for. They barrel their bourbon at 107 proof, and they don't add a drop of water afterward. What goes in the barrel is what comes out and put in the bottle for you to enjoy. No shortcuts here. Lower entry proof, like what Peerless does, means the spirit is barreled at a lower alcohol by volume, instead of the legal U.S. max of 125 proof. This offers several key benefits for whiskey aging. Water pulls different compounds from the wood than alcohol does. Lower entry proof allows for greater extraction of wood sugars, which results in a whiskey that's sweeter, richer, and smoother. High proof alcohol can pull more tannins and bitter compounds from the barrel. Lower proof leads to less bitterness and a more rounded mouthfeel, with fewer harsh notes, more approachable complex flavors like caramel, vanilla, and fruit. Whiskey at lower proof ages more harmoniously and allows flavors to blend more seamlessly over time. This results in a more balanced and cohesive final product. Many distillers in the 1800s barreled at lower proofs, and some modern producers like Peerless adopt this heritage approach to create whiskey that mirrors classic profiles. Not adding water while bottling helps preserve the whiskey's natural character. What we learn from this process is lower entry proof equals slower extraction, richer sweetness, and smoother aging. It's a craft choice that often trades efficiency for flavor, depth, and historical authenticity. Peerless produces around 20 barrels a day. They utilize 6 single-story rickhouses so that they have better temperature control and more consistency of the product. And let me tell you, the bottle they put it in, it's a beaut, Clark. It's made by a perfume bottle company near Atlanta with a heavy cap, an award-winning label, and design. In fact, they won an award in New York for the bottle, the cap, and the label, the first time all three have won together. That design was met with a lot of dedication. When they were originally designing the bottle, they were looking at liquor bottle companies, and none of them were willing to make the bottle the way they wanted it. It's shaped like a barrel that sits on a thick pedestal. The bottom of the pedestal says Made in America. And on the top part of the bottle near the neck is the signature of Henry Craver. And the heavy top that they talk about has a wood look to it. It is absolutely, in my opinion, the most beautiful bottle. You should be able to see a picture of it on the cover art of this podcast episode. Now, let's get into another part of this story about their dedication. Corky fought in the courts for 3 years to be able to get back the family's old distilling number. They wanted to be Kentucky 50. And why does this matter, you might wonder? Well, If you wanted to start a distillery up today, it'd be numbered in the 20,000s. Some of the most popular distilleries, like Buffalo Trace, is distiller number 113, Jim Beam distiller number 230, but Peerless, they were able to win back the original Kentucky 50. And that number carries a lot of weight. It says to the public, we were here first. When you go to the distillery, you see that number 50 all over the place, and it does make you feel like you've been put in a time machine and brought back to a part of history where things meant more to people. I love this passion. The fact that he could have just started it up with a number in the 20,000s and said, you know what, we're making a good product, you're going to love it. But no, he took the necessary time needed, the money to invest, to fight back, to regain that family legacy. And one of my absolute favorite parts about Peerless, when you go to the distillery, is they have a tasting panel to help name each single barrel. That means when you're picking one up, you already know whether that profile is going to hit your palate just right. It's personalized in a way that most big brands can't touch. And I look forward to talking to you about some of the single barrels that I have had the luxury to pick up. Corky Taylor didn't want to build something huge. He wanted to build something lasting. A distillery his father would be proud of. A bourbon the world would talk about. And with Kentucky Peerless, he's done just that. The next time you're in Louisville, you need to stop by. See the bottle, see the still, and taste the legacy. It's not just bourbon. It's family history in a glass. And if you're lucky, Corky might stop by one of your tastings and bring out General Patton's gun. Jackie and I have been to Peerless a few times. And the first time that we went just happened naturally. It was not planned. We were driving down to Tennessee for a family reunion. We were very excited to do so. And I had been starting to enjoy bourbon. I started with doing old fashions. I started taking away the simple syrup from the old fashions and started just having bourbon on ice. Then I started dialing down the ice and was getting into enjoying neat pours of bourbon. So Jackie, as sweet as she is, decided that we would make a stop on the bourbon trail. So when we pulled into Louisville, we stopped in this area they call Whiskey Row. There's a lot of different distilleries there. There's Michter's, there's Old Forester. Now Bardstown Bourbon Company has a shop there. Evan Williams Bourbon Experience, Angel's Envy. And we saw this place, Peerless. And we walked into the place, and it's just magical. It has exposed beams. It's rustic. There's an old truck inside the shop that has items for purchase. It's just gorgeous. It fits my vibe perfectly. They have these rustic steel cages that was housing the bottles with all the single barrels. You can see the still through the window. And then they have a room where you can learn the entire history of the distillery. And we were in there looking around at the merchandise and reading the history. And one of the workers came over to us and said, well, I'm going to offer this gentleman a taste. Would you be interested? And I was interested because the price was a little bit higher than I would normally spend on something that I haven't tried. But what ended up happening as we walked into the tasting room, she poured us a neat pour of something brand new. It was their 6-year double oak. And as soon as that hit my lips, I knew I was in trouble. It was the most flavorful, best tasting whiskey I had ever had in my life. And I looked over at Jackie, and I could see the look in her face that she felt the same way. And we immediately went over to that cage and picked up a bottle of it. We had to bring it home. Without that tasting, I would have never discovered this distillery. Too often in the bourbon world, people get excited about what's hyped up or what's popular. And to me, there's a lot of time wasted chasing whiskey that people think they need that doesn't taste even half as good as something like Peerless. That first experience was in June of 2021. And I still have that bottle today. And if you're lucky, I will share a pour with you. And that's their Double Oak 2021 Barrel Number 1. It's filled with rich spice flavors. They now thankfully offer their Double Oak product regularly on the shelf. And it is something, if people ask me for a recommendation, that I send them to. Then we just happened to be back on the bourbon trail in September of 2022 when they were releasing their Double Oak regular product that I was talking about on the shelf. And Corky Taylor was going to be there. And I knew I wanted to meet that man. So we waited outside the distillery. We waited to get in. We were able to meet Corky. He talked to us about Minnesota. His wife is from here. He signed some bottles. And he did look at me a little funny when I said, "Can you write thanks Dippy on there?" But I had to. Just had to have that on the house bar. And he was exactly the kind of man you would expect. An older man that is able to tell wonderful stories. And you just feel like you're at home when you're with him. So that was our second trip to the Peerless Distillery. Then we ended up making a third trip because I do like toasted bourbons, and Peerless was coming out with a toasted bourbon. So in March of 2024, we found ourselves down there again. And we were once again sitting outside waiting in line. And by happenstance, I was talking to this gentleman that is on the podcast Bourbon Hunters. And I was explaining the story of Peerless to him. And funny enough, in an episode that aired in May of 2024, he was talking to the head taster John Wadle of Peerless about the fact he mentioned some crazy Peerless fangirls that he had met in line for the toasted release. I laughed pretty hard when I was mowing the lawn and I heard that shout out. That's also the fun trip where the distillery cat Rye ended up puking on top of that pickup truck that I was talking about that's in the middle of the shop. That was something I wasn't expecting to see that day. Then I think everybody's favorite story. Jackie and I were going to be going to Chicago to see a Red Sox versus White Sox game. And we decided, yeah, Kentucky is for sure on the way to Chicago. So in June of 2024, we found ourselves back at the Peerless Distillery on the way to Chicago because they were releasing something very special. A cherry cola single barrel. Pure deliciousness. Peerless has won many awards. Their rye was named one of Whiskey Advocate's top 20 whiskeys of the year soon after its release. Most recently, their standouts are their Toasted, which scored 98 out of 100, and their High Rye, which won double platinum. However, my personal favorite is still their Double Oak, and some of the wacky single barrels that I've picked up throughout the years. I do have to shout out Beth and Tanya for also making some stops for me when they were on their trips to Kentucky. For me, the best part about being into bourbon is the experience. It's more than just drinking a spirit. It's a journey of flavor exploration, history coming to life, community, and American craftsmanship. And I think this is why other bourbon lovers stay hooked. Every bottle is a new adventure, from notes of caramel, spice, vanilla, and oak, to wild single barrel picks. Each time you get to discover nuanced flavors, and it's fun and rewarding. Bourbon is deeply American, steeped in stories, heritage, and old school techniques. Learning about pre-Prohibition distilleries, family legacies, and laws that shape the spirit adds depth to each pour. Bourbon brings people together, From bottle shares to tastings, Facebook groups to distillery tours, the bourbon world is full of welcoming, passionate fans eager to talk and share samples. Some of your friends don't enjoy the experience of the pours and tell you it's poison. It's still fun. It's amazing to appreciate the artistry, mash bills, still design, wood selection, char levels, and warehouse placement, and how all of that shapes what's in your glass. It's a blend of science and art, and to me, that's what makes it so captivating. And lastly, the thrill of tracking down limited editions or hidden gems is part of the fun. Whether it's a local store pick or a rare release, the chase makes the reward taste even better. So what are some of the Peerless offerings that I have hunted down? You might be wondering. Well, I've got an absolutely stacked list of Peerless expressions in front of me. From small batches and double oaks to some of the wildest single barrels with tasty notes that sound more like a dessert menu. You might remember that in order for it to be bourbon, you cannot add any flavorings or colors. So I just want to add that all of these flavor notes have strictly been imparted by the distillation process, the mash bill selected, and the aging process in the wood. They're all so very unique, but the process has done that. Nothing was added. And the naming of the single barrels was done by Peerless's group. They make the cutest stickers when they name them as well. It's just beautiful all around. I will put a couple pictures on the Dippy_Does Instagram if you're interested in looking at them. So first I'll talk about some of the finished batches that I've picked up. More recently, Peerless did a cognac finished. It clocks in at 112.1 proof, and it hits with an oak, a grape, and a crisp pear finish. It's elegant and fruit-forward with a refined finish. They also do a really wonderful rum barrel finished, and I have two standouts. The first version of it was 112.6 proof, and it's heavily cane sugar. But batch 2 is a little softer at 109 proof. It tastes like pineapple upside down cake, dusted in a sweet powdered sugar. Yes, I know, Brittany, you think I'm crazy. And then we've got the double oak. If you're into bold, spicy oak bombs, the double oak's for you. Oak, baking spices, gingerbread, hints of leather. It's deliciousness. Then some of the single barrel bourbons that I have. I've got apple fritter, cinnamon raisin bread, brown sugar and citrus, spiced bread pudding, going on and on and on. Pure deliciousness. A lot of baking spice vibes. They taste like what they say. Although, I would say the brown sugar and citrus taste kind of like an old-fashioned in a glass. Then you've got charred honeysuckle, which tastes toasty and sweet. Then that cherry soda we were talking about. It is so fruity. And another favorite, Choco Latte, which punches you in the face with Count Chocula nostalgia. No joke. And I don't want to overlook Country Jam, which tastes like berry preserves, brown sugar, and vanilla bean, making this one of the standouts. And that toasted bourbon they have, that really lays heavily on toffee, oak, and a hint of cola. They also offer a wide variety of ryes. First up, I have a single barrel of the Peerless Double Oak, bottled at 111.5 proof. This beauty hits with the deep oak. That's the spotlight here. No fancy frills, just pure, rich, seasoned oak. If you're someone who chases the toasted barrel punch, this one is a heavy hitter. Then their regular standard offering, the Peerless Double Oak Rye, is usually around 109 proof, and it layers baking spices, raisin with classic oak tannins. It's warm with a chewy to it that feels like the rye equivalent of oatmeal raisin cookies by the fire. Have you put yourself there yet? Because that's what it's like. Next up, what's breakfast without bourbon? I give you the Peerless Single Barrel Rye Breakfast Barrel. This puppy is 112.9 proof, and it's packed with baked muffin, ginger, and burnt maple. It's syrupy, spicy, and straight up dessert for breakfast. But if you have the vibe preferring a morning by the campfire, then Campsite would be for you. This one's 108.2, but you get toasted marshmallow and citrus. S'mores vibes with a citrusy twist? Count me in. And things get a little whimsical next with the cinnamon cake donut. This one's 109.9 proof, but it gives cinnamon sugar, fried pastry, and just a titch of mint. It sounds like a carnival and drinks like one too. Now let's head south to Kentucky Cake, punching in at 110.4 proof and tasting like yellow cake with a tiny hint of tobacco. It is sweet and smoky. And how about if you're looking for a vacation in a glass? We've got Rye Colada, 110 proof, a bursting with muddled mint, tropical fruit, and raw sugar. It's like sipping a cocktail on a Caribbean beach. Next, we got Southern Cider coming in at 112.6 proof. This one is all sweet oak and apple pie. It's fall in a glass and dangerously easy to sip. I got a Total Wine pick that they called Spearmint Daydream, and it nails that. It's a spicy spearmint candy cane. Holiday ready or just refreshingly weird? You'll have to come over and decide. And I'd like to end with two absolute bangers. State Fair, which is berry cotton candy, sweet hay, and funnel cake. Now that's a rye with nostalgia. It's a full-on carnival ride. Lastly, there's the Boom pick. Boom stands for Barrel Order of Minnesota, and it clocks in at 113 proof, but it tastes exactly like caramel apple. And honestly, I think it's probably the sleeper hit of the lineup. If any of these sound good to you, I encourage you to seek out a bottle of Peerless today. Whether it's a standard offering found on the shelf or a single barrel that you're lucky enough to come across, I have zero doubts that you will be pleased with what you find. So what makes Peerless special? They don't chill filter, they bottle at barrel proof, and they clearly love to experiment with barrels, finishes, and flavor profiles that take you places. From campfires to county fairs, breakfast tables to beach bars, Peerless isn't just pouring whiskey. They're telling stories in every glass. That's all for this pour of Dippy Does It All. If you liked this story, hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and pour yourself a little something Peerless to celebrate. If you are planning a trip yourself that takes you through Louisville, Kentucky, please let me know so I can place an online order. Until next time, cheers.